Here in a second. For those of you who were here on the first day and got to see the opening keynote, you'll recognize this guy. If you didn't get to see it, I'm sure you'll recognize him anyway. The wonderful David Duffett is going to talk to us about what geeks are doing wrong in their talks.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Now these stickers, no, I'm only joking, it just happened to be left up here, so I'll put that down there. I would like this to be a highly participative talk, and in order to engage you in participation, I've actually got some small chocolate prizes with me. I've got the Maltesers. Jim, stand up for a minute. Jim is the Malteser man. He has Maltesers. I've got Mars bars. Kathleen's the Mars bar lady. And I've got Smarties. Fraser is the Smarty man. Okay, so ask questions at any time as I go through a presentation. I'm all for just-in-time learning. No, other than you, Steve. Sorry, go ahead.
Which do you like best, Maltesers, Smarties, or Mars?
Personally, I like Maltesers best, but I can go any way. And also for answering questions as well. So if I ask you a question and an answer comes, then you get to choose, and depending on which chocolate you choose, the appropriate agent of chocolate will show up near you and hand over a small chocolate prize to you. How does that sound? Is that okay? Good. All right. So what I want to talk about is why nerds aren't heard. And I think there's a lot of geeks and nerds in the room, and a conference like this is very special. However, I believe that when we get back outside of a conference into the real world, we come across presentational scenarios that we are not necessarily ready for. And so that's what I want to do. And my agenda looks a little bit like this. I want to identify what I think the problem is, talk about why nerds need to be heard, and then go through 7 ways that geeks sabotage their own presentations. And in order to combat that, I've boiled it down to 7 powerful presenting protocols that geeks can make use of, and actually a magic factor as well. So how does that sound? Is that okay for our agenda? Yes. In that case, good. We will carry on. Thank you. But before we carry on, and before we get to the problem, we're on day 3 of the conference, or day 2 of the conference at the moment? 3 of the conference. I'd like to help you all to get to know each other just a little bit more. Last year, we did the geometric testing. Do you remember Jared did the shapes? Do you remember in his presentation, we all learned a bit more about each other. I would like to try the special hands in the air test to help us get to know each other a little bit more. So if you just clasp your hands together in front of you, please. Some of the more astute of you will instantly realise that one of your index fingers is closer to your face than the other. It's either going to be the left or the right. And by the way, if they're equidistant, there's something not quite right about you. and you should seek help. But you've either got the left finger closest to you or the right finger. Who are the left finger people? Put your hand in the air. Have a good look round, because this is going to help to get to know these people better. These are the sexy people in the room. Just have a little look. Okay. And who were the right finger people? Now, these are very special people. Keep an eye out. These people think they're the sexy people in the room. Okay. And fortunately, my talk does apply to both categories. So let's identify the problem. The problem is that, yeah, you go to work and you get to be a nerd. You get to wear the T-shirt, like there are 1-0, people out there, those that understand binary and those that don't. This one, actually, if you could read it, it says, "I'm not slacking off, my code is compiling." It's one of those, all of those T-shirts. You probably get your own corner of the office as well, and maybe your boss feeds you pizza on a Friday. However, round the corner, there's the salesman, isn't it? And I know Ron Burgundy is not a salesman. I'm just using him, and he's got his rather nice, fully expensed BMW SUV or whatever it was. And having worked in quite a few tech companies and seen this unfold on several occasions, I began to think to myself, hang on a minute, who's making and supporting this stuff? Hey, it's us geeks, isn't it? The geeks are doing that, and they need to be rewarded. And so the problem I see it, and the one I wanted to solve, is the fact that technical people make and support these amazing products and give the service around them. However, somehow they are paid less than the salespeople. They're recognised less than the salespeople, unless you're living in a very enlightened company like Sipgate, obviously. And they're rewarded less than the salespeople. Now, that's nothing against salespeople, because I think sales is an amazing skill of itself, and they deserve everything they get. I just want to help up the level of reward, recognition, and just good life in general that geeks get. Is anybody agreeing with that? Can I get an amen? That man with the large beard at the back gave a special amen. Which brand of chocolate would you like, sir? Mars. Kathleen, can you give that man a bar of chocolate? Thank you very much. That's a whole different talk. That's a whole different talk. Okay, so in short, I want geeks to be more, because if you are more, you can do more, and if you do more, you generally get more. These are the rules of life. If you are more, you can be more, and if you be more, you can do more. And that's what I would like to help with. Okay, so a conference like this is excellent. We're all geeks together, and we can geek out. And actually, when one geek gets up on the stage, there's already a connection, because you know they're a geek. And so everybody's like already on side, aren't they? How... Jared, I looked at you. What brand of chocolate would you like? He'll have a Malteser. Okay, Jared, thank you very much. I just caught his eye, that's all. So, okay, but when you come to do presentations outside of a gathering like this, in the real world, if you like, outside of this geekified bubble, they're pretty important things. Could be a job interview. A lot of job interviews include presentations these days. You might be showing your non-tech colleagues what you've got up to, and you need to convey that well. Maybe you're giving a sales presentation, and as we all know, it's one thing making a product, but if you don't sell it, well, if you don't market it and you don't sell it, it's a little bit like winking in the dark, isn't it? You know you're doing it, but nobody else does. So you have to get it out there. Very important. And, of course, you might want to sell your company or attract funding. So making presentations is a very, very important part of life. In fact, geeks that make great presentations, geeks that can speak, attract all sorts of success into their life, even maybe finding the right partner, because the confidence you get from being better at presentations will rub off into other areas of your life, and you'll find yourself more confident in other scenarios as well. Anybody ever seen a screen like this? The buffering screen. What does that generally indicate to us? What do you say, Joran? Joran? Waiting. Yeah, in other words, you've got a bad connection. Who said bad connection? What sort of chocolate would you like, sir? A Mars. Oh, I see. Kathleen, can you give that man a Mars? And now, how am I saying your name, Joran? Joran, yeah. Which chocolate would you like, Joran? Malteser on your table as well. How about that? A nice little bit of serendipity there. Yeah, what this is indicating is a bad connection. And I would say one of the biggest mistakes that geeks make is they don't form a connection with their audience. I would say that the geek's connection with their audience is rather like the bandwidth of your internet connection. If you haven't got a very wide connection, you're not going to get your information across very well. It's also got to be a duplex connection, hasn't it? And if you don't open it wide enough, you're not going to see what other people, the signs that other people are giving back to you about how well your presentation is going, whether they're understanding the technical things you say. And so, one of the things I would like to reinforce is the work that you need to do ahead of the presentation to open up that channel, to make your broadband connection wide. There's a special name for it, and I will come back to it a little bit later. This is all based on a book that I am currently writing. Progress is not going as fast as I would like, I have to admit. I'm about halfway through, and it's called Let the Geek Speak, and it's Presentation Skills for Nerds, or 7 Power Presenting Protocols for Nerds. Let me tell you about those protocols. The very first one is the purpose of the presentation. You know what tends to happen? Somebody comes along to you and says, I want you to do a presentation. And most geeks, the first thing they do is they flip open their laptop and they start on the slides, don't they? They're going to do the PowerPoint or the keynote or the whatever. And actually, a presentation is not about the slides. The slides are just an aid to the presentation. Really, you need to establish the purpose of your presentation. And I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there's probably 3 parties involved in the forming of any presentation. There's the person who asked you to do it in the first place. I would call them the sponsor. There's the person that's going to deliver the presentation. I would call them the speaker. And then there is the audience. Those are 3 parties. And I would say what you've got to do is try and buy all 3 of those into one thing. I call it the learning contract. You could call it an agreement or whatever you want. But you've got to buy all 3 of those people in to what you're doing in order to make it a good experience for everybody. By the way, did you notice the casual way I showed you the agenda for this presentation? Then I said to you, what do you think about that? Are you on for it? And you all agreed, didn't you? That was me buying you in as the participants, the audience, into this presentation and doing that. So the purpose, consider the purpose of your presentation. Then we have planning the presentation. And planning the presentation is not writing your slides. We haven't got to the slides part yet. The slides part will come a little bit later. You've got to plan the presentation. You've got to think about the construction of the presentation. One of the things you can think about, and this is just one of the things, is the keys to getting things into people's memories, okay? Because people's memories are very important things. And if you want to get things into them, you need to organise it very positively. Have you ever noticed in a news broadcast, there's a certain structure that they go with, isn't there? What comes first in a news broadcast? The headlines. Did you say headlines, sir? What chocolate would you like? Malteser, please, Jim, over in that direction. The headlines. In other words, the key information comes first, doesn't it? You've got to do that. What comes next? Stories. The stories. Who said the stories? It was Jason. Give Jason, what chocolate would you like? You'll have a Mars from a lovely Kathleen. Lovely. Okay. The main story. So the main body of the presentation, if you like. And what's last?
Family interest.
Sorry?
Family interest.
I like the way you said that, Jared. Jared, what chocolate would you like?
A Mars bar, please.
Okay, Jared's going to have the Mars bar. He says family interest. Of course, we all know that there's a summary at the end, but also there's that special story, isn't there? Like, you know, it's all been doom and gloom. The last story is the budgie riding the bicycle, or, you know, whatever it happens to be. And this is because everybody in that industry knows there are 5 keys, count them, 5, of getting things into people's memories. There's firsts and lasts, the beginning and the end, technically known as primacy and recency. You remember your first day in a job, you remember your last day in that job, you don't necessarily remember all the days in between. You remember the beginning of the movie, you remember the end of the movie, you don't necessarily remember all the things in between. So primacy and recency. Then there is links to what you already know. And this is the power of the analogy. So when you're planning your presentation and you want to introduce a new concept, what you need to think is, what does my audience already know about? And how can I use what they already know in order to introduce a new concept to them? Let me give you a small example. Imagine if we were talking about Ohm's law and the flow of current, and I wanted to introduce that. Most people have at one stage or another used a hose pipe in their garden, haven't they? So I could say if I put my foot on the hose pipe and restrict the flow, then, you know, less water comes out at the other end. And we could use that as an analogy. So first and last, links to what you already know. Repetition. Repetition is very important. Repetition is the mother of learning, or sometimes the distant cousin of boredom. So you have to kind of be a little bit careful with it. Use it sparingly, but repeat things across. Do you remember, does anybody know what kind of developer Dan is? He's a web developer, isn't he? He might have repeated that on several occasions. And now we all know that Dan's a web developer. And the last one is coming back to Jared's point. You wondered when I was going to tie all this together, didn't you? Family interest. It's outstanding, the outstanding things. So in other words, if I showed you 50 photos of my recent holiday, you'd remember the first one, you'd remember the last one, you'd remember pictures of places you've already been to, because it's a link with what you already know. You'd remember repeated ones if there was a particular scene that was in there 4 times. But if there was an outstanding one, if it was all landscapes, and one of them was a pigeon wearing a pair of glasses, that would be outstanding, and you would remember that. So when you plan your presentation, put these things in at the planning stage. Before you get to the slides, make sure that you keep those things in hand. Okay, then there is preparation. You know that old maxim, don't you? Failure to prepare is to prepare for failure. You really need to put some preparation in. And when I'm talking about preparation, I'm talking about a multi-dimensional approach to preparation. Have you got, this is going to sound slightly extreme, but have you got a floor plan of the room you're going to present in? Do you know which end of it you're going to be in? Do you know whether you can black out with the curtains so that the screen can be seen? If you want to use a flip chart, do you know you're going to have a flip chart? Are you bringing the flip chart? Are you bringing the pens for the flip chart? All of these multi-dimensional things for your preparation, and that's outlined in the book under the heading, preparation. And then there's practice. And let me start by telling you what practice is not. Practice is not flipping open your laptop, going through the slides in your hotel room or on the aeroplane, thinking, yeah, I'll say that when that slide comes up, and I'll say this when this slide comes up. Because as we all know, it never quite goes like that. What happens is when you start actually delivering, you find the words and phrases that don't really fit together very well. You find the things that you've got a little bit of a mental block on. So when I talk about preparation, what I mean is actually standing up and delivering it out loud. Ideally to your friends or colleagues or family. Best if somebody that knows about the technical side of your presentation is involved. Doesn't have to be. But if none of those are available, use this bad boy. We've all got one of these, haven't we? Use the voice recorder. record your own presentation, then listen back to it afterwards. Number one, it will give you an idea of what you sound like. Number two, it will give you an idea of the timing, whether you're going to massively overrun or whether you need to give additional information in certain places. But it will also help you to establish which things you're stumbling over. You know, when you come to say something, whether it doesn't sound right or you don't get the words out right. So make sure you practice, and practice again. Here's a little phrase for you to remember. Amateurs practice until they get it right, but professionals practice until they can't get it wrong. How often do footballers practice for that 90 minutes on the pitch? They're at it all week, aren't they? And I would say if a presentation is worth giving, it's worth giving badly for as long as you need to before you can give it well. And make sure you do the giving it badly bit before you get up on the stage to give it well. Then there's participation. People love doing things with other people. They don't necessarily want things done to them. They want things done with them. And so engaging your audience in participation is a way to make that happen. I'll come on to more of that a little bit later. Then there's the performance of actually giving the presentation. And as you know, it's not entirely out of the question that you might get slightly nervous about doing a presentation. And these things need to be handled. There's nothing wrong with having nerves, nothing wrong with having butterflies. You just need to get those butterflies flying in formation, if you will, to give you the best result. So you need to think about performance. And when you come to performing, it's not just about nerves, it's about lots of other things. It's about three other things: pitching, and that's the pitch of your voice, pauses, pronunciation, all of those kind of things. There's a lot of P's in these things. And then lastly, something that everybody forgets is post-event. What about following up afterwards? If you're delivering some training, what about checking out whether people actually feel trained, whether they feel ready to do their job? Not just in the room, you know, with the traditional happy sheet, but a structured event, a structured approach, I should say, to post-event follow-up. Those are the protocols. So what is it that Geeks do? Well, sadly, Geeks sabotage their own presentation in a number of different ways, and all of them can actually be traced back to not living within those protocols, and I will explain why. So let's have a little look. So first of all, it's much too tech-focused. Now, I'm not talking about a conference like this, because that's what we're here for. We're here to learn about the tech. But when you're giving a presentation to another audience, the chances are, maybe in a sales presentation, that the decision maker is not that technical. And the fact of the matter is that people don't really care how much you know. It's not a contest to see who knows the most in a sales or other kind of scenario. What they're looking for is how much you care. So people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care about them. What is it they're looking for? What is it they're needing from things? In fact, everybody is tuned into that one radio station, WIIFM, What's in it for me? And that's fine, that's the way it should be. Everybody's got their own interests at heart. What you need to do is find out what their interests are and cater to them. And my little idea here is come up at least one technical level. So wherever you were thinking to talk, come up at least one level, maybe two. And the people that are that technical, that want to ask those questions can, and you can answer them, but it means that you won't bore or sabotage your presentation for the majority of the audience. And the people that are technical will go with you, and they'll just ask the questions about the technical stuff they want to know. So that's one of the ways that Geeks sabotage their own presentations. Then there's the proper planning, as I was already saying. The FPI 6 Ps, proper planning prevents particularly poor performance. That's the cleaned up version, that one. And so ideas to consider are your content and structure, like I was already saying, the beginning and the end. Cynical people, have you ever been on one of those presentation skills class where some aging person that's disconnected from reality comes along and says, what you've got to do, you've got to tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Well, that's not a bad identification for a structure, but the sort of people that say that are really saying what you've got to do is bore them, tell them how you're going to bore them, and then tell them how you bore them. And, really, you need to put in a little bit more than that. So content and structure and the keys to memory, very important indeed. So how else do Geeks sabotage their own presentations? Lastminute.com. This is when you're the next presenter after me and you're sat on your laptop right now. And I'm not talking about tinkering with the fonts. I'm talking about you doing your presentation. It's a little bit last minute. And yet it does happen, doesn't it? if we're honest we can be honest with each other within the confines of a small room. This happens. Failure to prepare is to prepare for failure. And as I said, if a presentation is worth giving properly, it's worth preparing for properly. And many, many dimensions to a good presentation. It's not just about the structure. It's not just about your delivery and your projections. So the idea is to walk in your customer's shoes. And has anybody ever heard of Jack Handy, the deep thinker from America? That same man with the beard, he's also heard of Jack Handy. Which chocolate do you want, sir? Smarties. Fraser. It's excellent. I was really wanting Fraser to get involved and have some, yes, great. By the way, have you seen that little meme on Facebook that says, next time you think that your job is not worth doing, just think about the guy that puts the indicators on the BMWs. Anyway, coming back to this, the deep thinker Jack Handy from America says, if you're going to criticize somebody, walk a mile in their shoes first. Because then when you do criticize them, you'll be a mile away and have their shoes. It's very good advice, isn't it? But no, walk in your audience shoes. How are they going to hear about your presentation in the first place? When they come to the venue, by the way, didn't Dan do a brilliant job here? Were you wowed when you arrived? Let's give that Dan a hand. There's a man who's walked in his audience's shoes, hasn't he? And he's thought about the things that they're going to experience, and he's put the right things in place. And that's something we all need to do to an extent with our presentations. What's the next way that geeks sabotage their presentations? By not beta trialing them. You wouldn't put any software out without beta trialing it, would you? No, of course not. You'd probably alpha trial it and then beta trial it. So with our presentations, why don't we practice them out loud? That's what we need to do. That's what's going to get us optimized to giving a good presentation. That's the way that good presentations are made and manufactured, is by people that are prepared to practice them out loud several times. I would say at least 3. And by the way, when you come to do a presentation or you come to give a training class, any idea what the optimal number is once you've done it so many times when you get the best? Any idea? 10,000. But people think 3, 4, 5. Somewhere around the 3, 4, 5. You've heard the questions you're going to hear. You've stumbled over the things you're going to stumble over. And usually the 3rd, 4th or 5th is when you give the best iteration of that presentation. And then it becomes a challenge of keeping it fresh thereafter. But that's just an aside one. Put your money away, Johan. I'm including that in the ticket price. Let's carry on. Okay, so make sure that you practice out loud. Okay. Another great failure that technical people make when giving presentations is they leave out the... Who do you think gets left out in a presentation? The audience. Did you say the audience, Jared? The audience. Now, I see. I'm going to make the decision for you because you've already got a Malteser and a Mars. Fraser, can you give that man a Smarties?
That was my next choice.
Excellent. Thank you. I anticipate that. That's right. They leave out the audience. And by the way, do you see what I did there? I somehow involved the audience in saying, I beg your pardon?
You should get a Smartie.
I'll tell you what, I've got one up here. I'll eat that later. Thank you very much, Jim. I'm walking in my customer's shoes and thinking about these things. That's right, they leave out the audience. Participation is absolutely crucial for any great presentation, and it can be done in many forms. You can do questions. Yeah, how many of you eat bananas or whatever? Okay, oh, you eat bananas, Jim. When's the last banana you ate? You can involve the people in the presentation that way. But it's not just that. You can ask for a quick show of hands. You can, by the way, talking of show of hands, I saw an excellent presentation not that long ago where the guy, he came out right in the middle of the stage and he said, if you believe in telekinesis, raise my hand. And then he went, David, just stop doing that. I thought that was a particularly excellent one. But yes, it can be involvement in demonstrations and contribution of people's stories and experience. Can you imagine the amazing amount of experience there is just in this room right now? There's so much stuff, and so if we had the time and we were talking about a given subject, we could get people to recount their stories and contribute their experience. In fact, in the conversation after my keynote on Monday, a number of people, Alan included, raised the matter of young engineers and getting to know more about business in general. And this is, by the way, is my sort of giving back on that subject. I wouldn't consider myself worthy of giving great business advice, but I've been around the block a bit with presentations, so that's the part that I would like to give back to people. So there's all of these different kind of things. And what's the idea? Well, even before you do your slides, because I know engineers have got this preoccupation with getting slides done, but even before you do that, as part of your preparation, brainstorm just on participation methods. Just spend a few minutes thinking, how can I involve people in this presentation? And it will make for a lot better experience for everybody. How do geeks sabotage their own presentations? Number 6, apathy. Have you ever seen a geek that walks out on stage or in the gathering and really doesn't want to be there? You know, you just get that, you get that vibe. And remember, the IASM on the end of enthusiasm actually stands for, it's been officially proven, I am sold myself. You've got to be ready. You've got to be in that enthusiastic place when you come out on stage. And the reason for that is that attitudes are catching. Enthusiasm is catching, but actually apathy is even more catching. That transmits even easier. What about the guy that comes out, he hasn't properly dealt with his nerves, and we know that uneasy makes for uneasy. If you're an uneasy presenter, your audience are going to be sort of becoming uneasy just watching you. So you need to deal with these nerves, and there are lots of ways of doing that. And then you can use pitch, pace, and pauses to make your presentation even more enthusiastic, even more engaging, and remove the apathy from the room. You can weed it out. You can even inoculate against apathy. You know, you can come out and you can say, I can see a few of you sat out there thinking, yeah, I know that bloke on stage. He's nowhere near as technical as me. Well, guess what? I'm not here to talk about technical things. I'm here to talk about, and you can just, you know, help the audience just feel a little bit more at home with things that are going on. Okay, now, what's the key idea? The key idea is check yourself before you do your presentation. Go through that little mental checklist. Am I feeling excited about what I've been asked to do? And by the way, if you're asked to deliver a presentation that you can't get excited about, just tell the person that asked you, that's not my bag. You need to find somebody else that's better. If somebody asked me to do like a health and safety presentation, that would not be my bag. And yet, I actually taught a guy who was our facilities manager at a previous company. I did a presentation skills training inside the company, and we were talking about being true to yourself. And this guy was, you know, a reasonably relaxed, easygoing guy. But, of course, there needs to be a degree of formality when you're involved in health and safety and risk assessments and all of those kinds of things. So I went through a few things with him, and when he started his presentation after lunch, which is when they put the things that they've been learning into practice, he started off like this. He went, okay, we're talking about a relatively serious subject here, but heard like an afternoon off. Like this. A few people put their hands up, and he went, in hospital. Because that's where you'll be if you don't listen to the rest of the contents of this presentation. I think the other thing he did was, anybody like a free ride home in an ambulance? You know, he really took it on board. It was great stuff. Okay, so check yourself. And the last way that geeks fail to prepare for their presentations is they don't do the follow-up. They don't think about the follow-up. What did the participants think of the presentation? What was required? Was the required learning achieved? How are you going to measure it? In what ways? Well, time-wise, you can measure it immediately after, and then sometime after the event. You can actually, if it's a training kind of thing, you can go back to the boss of the trainees afterwards, 2 months after, saying, have they put that training into practice, and is it actually paying off for them? If not, do they need more training? In fact, you can ask yourselves whether the more presentations are required, either a different audience with the same subject matter, or the same audience with different subject matter. There's a couple of different ways you might do it. But, again, plug in follow-up at the very, very beginning. That's the best way to do it. With your sponsor, go through with them, the person that asked you to do the presentation. When are we going to measure how effective this presentation has been? These are all key things. So, coming back to this, I think we'll all agree that what we need to do is open up the best connection we possibly can with our audience in order to give the best information. I once sat in, when this came home to me, is when I sat in on a training course. It was a 3-day training class about the technicalities of Tetra. Tetra is a radio system from the same stable as GSM. It's what's used in the emergency services in some countries. And I sat in on a 3-day technical training class, and I noticed that people only asked questions at the end of the 3rd day. And what I computed in my mind is that the trainer had not made it safe enough to ask questions from the very beginning. It spent no time in establishing rapport with the audience, and therefore kind of bringing down the barriers a little bit. Maybe he wanted it that way, but my guess is he just wasn't conscious of what he was doing. And so this is when it came to me that we need to make that channel right at the very beginning. Now, you'll remember the protocols. I'm going to unlock the magic factor. Did you notice the words magic factor earlier on in the presentation in red? It did flash before your eyes once. And if you arrange the protocols in a certain way, you remember you've got to think of the purpose. You've got to plan for a great presentation. You need to go through all of those phases of preparation. You need to practice the presentation out loud. You need to think about the way you're going to engage people in participation. You need to make sure your performance is on point. That's absolutely key. And you need to think about post-event. You can see the magic factor is rapport. That is your communication channel. And so the 8th protocol, if you like, or the magic factor, is establishing rapport with your audience ahead of the presentation. And when I say ahead of the presentation, that doesn't necessarily mean ahead of you coming up on stage. If you've not had a chance to interact with the audience ahead, maybe you can send the audience an email. Maybe you can put them to one of your YouTube videos. Because the more time people spend with you, the more they're going to like you. The more they like you, the more they're going to trust you. And so all of these things are important. But if you've not had a chance to interact with the audience, you need to spend a few minutes at the beginning of the presentation opening up that channel, making it easy for the audience to talk to you. Okay, so that's the end of the main part of what I want to say. What I would like to do is open up for a couple of quick questions. We've got a few minutes before I summarise the main points. And the first question is over to Matt. Matt, before you even ask the question, I know it's going to be a high-quality question. Which chocolate would you like? The Mars. Okay, that's from Kathleen. Go ahead with your question. Does anybody have a mic for Matt for the question? Of course, it's Kathleen, the same lady with the Mars.
Sorry, I've had the privilege of hearing David Duffett speak quite a bit, and every time I do, I learn something. How do I learn more, David? He did not pay me to ask this question. Like, you're doing a book on this, aren't you?
I am doing a book on this very subject. And
Okay.
believe it or not, one of the last slides will have the URL you can go to. Not to get the book yet, because it's not written, but a free report highlighting those 7 ways that geeks sabotage their own presentations. It's called Why Nerds Aren't Heard. But thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, just by words of compliment, like so the class that I think David was talking about during his talk, he did at Digium, or the one that I remember, he did at Digium, and everybody that came out of it, I didn't get the opportunity to go to it, but everybody that came out of it was very impressed by it. I think he covered a lot of some of the same material here. But I always learn something new about improving presentation and style. I don't know if I'm good at it, but I always learn something, and I try to do something new whenever I do it.
Thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate that.
I appreciate it, David. Thanks.
That Sangoma endorsement right there. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Who's got our next question? It's David over there. David, which sort of chocolate would you like? Diabetic. Which one?
Diabetic. I don't eat chocolate.
Okay. I'll eat yours. Actually, I'm diabetic as well. Anyway, carry on.
So what do you do to get over the nerves when you're getting up there?
That's a very, very good question. And actually, let me first say that I don't think you'll ever 100% get rid of nerves. And I would say it's good to have the 5 or 10% of them left. But what I would submit is by going through those protocols that I've mentioned, by the time you get to the performance one, you will have diffused a good amount of the nerves just by thinking about the purpose, planning, preparing, and practicing. Practicing is a big one. So nerves are going to affect you most when you first come out on stage, right? So what do you think that tells you about the parts of the presentation you should practice most? The beginning. I would say practice the beginning of the presentation maybe twice as much as you practice the rest. And then when you come out and the nerves are trying to grab you, you can be on autopilot with the part that you practiced. You can say, good morning, I'm David Duffett. I'm here to talk to you about making great presentations. Even though things are going a little bit haywire in your head, you've practiced that part so well. And then you can throw it over to the audience with, who here has seen a really terrible presentation? A few people put their hand up. You say, you, sir, what was the terrible presentation you saw? You don't have to tell us the name, but what made it terrible? And actually then you throw an attention to that person, you can gather yourself and carry on, for example. There's a few, some of them are in the book, David. I haven't got time to go through them all right now, okay? But by going through those protocols, you will get rid of the majority of your nerves. But if you just go on the internet and say, how do I get rid of nerves? I recently saw there was a PDF, 24 ways to get rid of your nerves about making a presentation. So there's a lot of good stuff out there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Alan Percy is our next one, and then Mira. Alan, which chocolate?
I'm a Mars bar.
Mars bar. That's handy.
So one of the things, many, many years ago, Dale Carnegie, of course, the guy taught me that I thought was a really neat trick was, he said, well, first of all, a little golf analogy. They said, when you play golf, how do you play golf? And of course I said, well, you get the tee box and you hit the ball off into the fairway. He goes, nah, you're doing it backwards. The first thing you need to do is say, I need to get the ball in the hole. And then you need to start thinking backwards. Okay, to get the ball in the hole, I need to be about 100 yards out. Then if I go 100 yards out, how do I get to 100 yards out? And you should, the same thing with presentations. You need to start with, what is your call to action? What's the purpose of your presentation, like you said? What's the call to action? What do you want people to do when they leave the room? Do you want them to fill out a survey? Do you want them to buy something? Do you want them to use some new methodology? And then work your way backwards. How do you convince people to do
Brilliant.
that?
In the words of Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. Yeah. Excellent. And by the way, that learning contract I mentioned, that would have those objectives and the aim in that you're trying to buy everybody into. Thank you. And it was Mira next. Mira, which chocolate? No chocolate. Okay. Fair enough. Go ahead with your question.
Thank you, David, for this amazing presentation. Thank you so much. I'm more nervous asking the question than I was presenting. Now, what would you say? So how can we do all of this really fast? Because all of this is time consuming, and sometimes we're invited to speak just a couple of days before the conference, for example.
Yeah.
So what would you say? What is the most important thing that we should do and we have time for?
I would say if you were to think to yourself, out of all those protocols, I haven't got time to do them all, which ones are the most important? It's very, very difficult. But if you know your material and you've got a rough idea of the structure of a presentation, it would be the practice one. Doing the practice, and practice a little bit more. However, what I would say is if this presentation is important, really, you've got to take the time. You can't manufacture any more time. And if you're in a scenario where it's your boss that's asked you to make the presentation, you can say to him, I'm open to doing it, but I want to make a good job. So which of my priorities for the next 2 days should we take off so that I can spend the extra time preparing for this presentation? Because if it's important, it needs to be done. But I do know what you mean, that in real life, people pressure. But one of the things I learned across my career, especially as I got a little bit older and a few grey hairs, is to say no to people. Or to say, yeah, I'd love to do that presentation, but you're giving me this, and this to do. I haven't got time to make a good job of all of them. Which one's going to suffer? That's maybe not the answer that you were looking for. I don't know. But it would be practicing would be the key one. That's the one where most people fail. Thank you, Mira. Any other questions before we summarise? Oh, got 2 over there. We'll go to Jason first and then to Dave. Jason, which chocolate?
I was going to pick Smarties because then that gives Fraser some exercise because he's right where across the other side of the room.
What an altruistic thing to do.
Well, nobody's picking Smarties. He's feeling left out.
Well, actually, it's not all bad because I happen to know that Fraser personally likes Smarties. And one of the unwritten bits of the deal was they get to keep what's left afterwards. So Fraser should be all right. Go ahead, Jason.
In which case, I should have given out the Mars bars. But you might have mentioned this. Your book, have you got a projected publishing time, and is it going to be purely online, or is it going to be available?
No, it will be a real physical book that you can hold in your hand. I was hoping to get it done in time for ClueCon. I'll be very honest, but I'm not sure I'm going to make it. I will be speaking about this subject in a similar way in ClueCon. Very much looking forward to that. And ClueCon is an excellent place to go, by the way. A great family feel to a conference there. But what I have got is I've got some rather trendy, let the geek speak, zip-up fleeces. And so, because I said to ClueCon I'd bring some books to give away, I'm going to, not hundreds of books, just a few books, I'm going to bring a couple of fleeces to give away in there. Everybody knows that the ClueCon draw is the draw to be part of. Okay, Dave, which chocolate first of all?
Mars bar.
Mars bar, that's very handy. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a basic question on pacing and tempo because I often feel like when I'm presenting, I'm going too fast. Yet you speak quite with a, quick tempo, and it works very well. So am I overthinking this, or what makes it work or not work when you're...
There's a couple of different ways at looking at this, and both of them are true. The first one is, if somebody's speaking fast, you could think to yourself, they're speaking fast because they want to get it out of the way. They want to get it out of the way because they don't like it, and therefore they're a sort of an uneasy presenter. But that's if you take it in isolation. The other thing to know is in studies, when people deliver stuff fast, people do pick it up. So this, and unless, of course, we're talking about people whose first language is not English. And when you're doing that, you should deliberately try and slow things down to help everybody take on board what they're saying. But in studies, when people speak fast, the audience did pick up as much information, so there's no need to worry about that. What I would say is you can't take that in isolation. You've got to take it with the rest of the things that are going on with the body language of the presenter and with the other things that they're doing. But in and of itself, it's not a bad thing. Obviously, if people are speaking so fast that you just can't get hold of things, then that would be, rather unacceptable. But I think if you know that the majority of your audience can pick up English at a regular pace, then you can improve it. You can increase the pace a little bit. On the other hand, practicing comes in. If you're conscious of it and it's something you don't want to do, then it's more and more practice. You remember when you learned to drive, and when you did the indicate or change gear, the car would wobble, wouldn't it? Because you were concentrating on changing gear rather than steering. But now, it's nothing, is it? It all works just nicely. Or maybe you drive an automatic and don't need to worry about it. But presentations is like this. The more you consciously think about presentations, the more you can listen to yourself as you're going without swerving, as it were, and you can moderate yourself in the middle of your own presentation. Great question, though, Dave. Thank you. I've got 2 more questions, and then we must finish. We'll go for Eric first and then Steve. Eric, which chocolate? Malteser. Malteser, OK.
He should get a little exercise, too. What was the most difficult presentation you had to make?
I would say the most difficult presentation I've made is one to an audience in Japan of Japanese people. And the reason is that I love to get a lot of interaction going, as you could see. Japanese people as a culture don't like to ask questions during a presentation because it's seen as a sign of weakness. So if you ask a question in front of your peers, it's because you don't know the answer. And so it's a sign of weakness. And so there was zero interaction. And, of course, Japanese culture, they all go partying till 5 o'clock in the morning and then roll into work. And so while you're trying to do your best presentation, they're going... and it's not very helpful, really. And then at the break of that particular presentation, they all wanted to ask a question. So they formed a line. And, of course, as a presenter, as you know, giving a presentation is quite taxing. If you're on your feet all day, you really want the breaks. And so to then have like 15 people or 20 people or however many it was all in a line. And, of course, in Japan, the handing over of the business cards is quite a thing. So this line of 15 or 20 people all wanted to go, and I had to go, oh. You can't just take a business card and put it in your back pocket. You've got to sort of acknowledge it. So that was probably the most difficult one. Thank you, Eric. And Steve, our last question. Which chocolate, Steve? Okay.
I was just thinking about a non-tech context where I sometimes speak, and I don't want to go into it, but it's a context where it's very important to me that the audience, the people listening, know that I'm sold and hear the heart of the message and so on. So I prepare very carefully. I'm not that confident in that context. And then as I'm saying what I want to say, I've got good notes and I know where I'm at, but I worry that the preparation maybe can detract from the ability to communicate it because you can go into automatic mode, and you 100% don't want to go in automatic mode. You want to go where the passion can really come across. So is that,
I would say the best thing you could do there is practice, not necessarily in front of audience, but into your cell phone and record it and then play it back. Because the practicing is going to get you more familiar with the material, so you can go off your notes a little bit. Have you noticed when people get locked onto their notes, they do go into sort of robot mode, don't they? And you can practice the parts where you want to put a little bit of passion into it in the privacy of your own room rather than in front of your audience. I'm afraid I haven't got a longer answer than that.
Not embarrassed, not ashamed, worried to embarrass myself. So that's
Right. Good. Okay, so I just want to summarise at the end of the presentation here. Geeks that can speak rock in so many ways, not just in being more successful in the presentations they make to their technical colleagues, but in job interviews, in getting that new job in a different company, in pay rises, promotions, all of that kind of stuff. Avoid the pitfalls I outlined in this presentation. Remember those power presenting protocols. The rewards really are there for you to take, and just like a race, in order to win a race, you don't have to be an hour in front of your nearest competitor, do you? You have to be 1 second in front, or half a second, or whatever. And really, this is the way I built my career, by going to technical conferences, mainly in the States, and being a little bit better than most of the other presenters. Because I noticed that most of the other presenters weren't just doing the basic things. They'd just hack their slides up the night before and all that kind of stuff. So it was Matt who asked how to get further information. You go to www.letthegeekspeak geeks.com/free report to get your Why Nerds Aren't Heard, 7 ways that geeks sabotage their own presentations kind of PDF there. So it's been a pleasure talking to you about being a geek that can speak. It's been a pleasure outlining those protocols. But most importantly, I know it's going to be a pleasure for you when you put these protocols into practice and receive all of the rewards that a geek that can speak gets. Thank you very much.